Part of the family now, eh? You know, when we found you in that bar, you were skin and bones. Even then, I saw a fire in you. Done well, Enzo. I'm proud of you.
Grazie, Luca.
Luca Trapani is more than Don Torrisi's underboss, more than the steady hand who tempers the hot-blooded council of Consigliere Agostino Russo, more than a mentor guiding Enzo through the life they've all chosen. Luca's a man with roots that run deep in this world. His bloodline ties him to the very foundation of the Mafia saga. His own son would one day become a prominent figure in the Salieri Crime Family, the first Mafia game, out in the United States, in the American city of Lost Heaven. But heritage is only part of his story. Luca's a family man at heart, but he's also someone who's weathered more wars than most men could count, and was lucky to see most of them through to the end. And yet, despite all the bloodshed, all the hardship, all the difficult jobs he was asked of by Don Torrisi, he managed to carry himself with a rare balance. Ruthless when business demands it, yet willing to meet people in the middle when it can keep the peace and keep their ventures thriving. Luca understands the value of stability, of knowing when to fight and when to negotiate. As he perfectly puts it with Cesare, when he applies pressure, there is a purpose, a deeper reason behind why he reacts or chooses to let certain things slide. Today we're diving into the story of Luca Trapani, how he fell in with the Don, how he, along with Don and Tino, were the foundations of what would one day become the Torrisi Crime Family, and of course how Luca was the counterbalance to so many others within the family, and how that came to apply to Enzo, how he showed him how to navigate such a dangerous and challenging world with a level head and of course respect that was well earned. Luca's history in the region is as deep and long-standing as the Don's own. He grew up in the hills surrounding Don Torrisi's vineyard, brought here as a boy by his father, a cattle farmer who earned an honest living just working the land. That is of course by Luca's own accounts. Interestingly, in that same account, there's no mention of a mother nor of any possible siblings. Suffice to say, there are gaps in the story of either where Luca came from and who was there in his earliest of years, or it just simply didn't matter when it came to understanding of his story and how it ties into the Don, which it ties in pretty intricately. Because what is known is that these hills were Luca's home for as long as he could remember. As a young boy, he spent countless hours wandering them, learning every ridge, every gully, every twisting path until they were second nature to him. From certain high points, he would watch the movements of the local bandits. He learned where they hid, which trails they favored, and how they seemed to move across the countryside like shadows. While observing them, he made the smart choice of keeping his distance, never drawing their attention, but remembering vividly everything he saw. Year after year, those quiet observations would come together to form a strong understanding of the bandits' habits and their patterns. It was knowledge he didn't realize the full value of at the time, but later in 1904 specifically, we would see him utilize that knowledge as one of his greatest advantages against the Messina bandits. During the same period as we see Luca put his knowledge of the hills to use, he also shows a side of himself that's rarely seen, if ever again. It happens on Collection Day when he, Enzo, and Cesare are sent to recover a water pump stolen from the local farmer, Ficera. Usually, Luca works with a steady hand, never rushing into a situation without reason. Hell, even a few moments before that, he basically let Ficera outright disrespect the Don by claiming he pays the Don for protection, yet because the bandits came by and stole his water pump, it feels like he's no different than the bandits that just robbed him.
Signor Ficera, is something bothering you?
Yes, you could say that. 2 nights ago, thieves came and stole my new water pump. Hundreds of lira just thrown away.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I pay you to protect my property, yet you do nothing. I believe Don Torrisi to be an honorable man, but it seems he is no better than these thieves.
Hey! Watch your mouth!
Calma. Our friend here has a point.
Luca lets the insult go, explaining that he does ultimately have a point to what he just said. We'll eventually return to Collection Day and highlight more of Luca's personality and the advantages and intelligence he wields over everybody else, but what we're focusing on here specifically are the bandits. Because here, he's very different. He moves ahead of Cesare and Enzo, striding deeper into the hills with a pace and focus that feels almost personal. He does claim that they of course can't let this offense stand, as he tells Enzo. When the bandits stole that water pump from Facetta, they basically put their hands in the Don's pockets, something that can't stand. But it also ties directly back to Luca's own past, because bandits killed his father. After his father's killing, Lucas says only that the Don stepped in and helped him. He never explains what that help actually meant. It could have been as simple as taking him in, watching over him, giving him honest work, or making sure someone paid for his father's death. All of those possibilities still remain open, but if we pay attention to Luca's own timeline, claiming he's worked with the Don for 20 years, and consider how Torrisi's rise to power intertwined with the Spadaros during the same period, the pieces begin to align. It points to an origin that stretches back 2 decades, to the very moment when loss and opportunity crossed paths in his life. If Torrisi's rise and Luca's run-in with him are somewhat accurate, then the timelines should look like this. When Luca's father was killed by bandits, around the same time Don Torrisi was still working under the elder Baron Fontanella. Long before Torrisi was the figure we now know, he would have still been establishing that relationship between him and the Fontanella family, either officially reaching the position of overseer or working towards overseeing the Fontanella's lands. Remember, the Baron still owns this land, even the ground where Torrisi's vineyard would stand many years later, which creates a layered and often delicate history between the Fontanella and Torrisi families. Luca, in his own recollection, speaks of working with the elder Baron himself. He describes being part of a small, tight-knit outfit that formed the early core of Torrisi's clan, collecting rent from Fontanella's tenants and safeguarding the Baron's property. This means Luca's beginnings with Bernardo Torrisi were not only early, but very significant. He wasn't a peripheral figure that they just took in and felt sorry for. He was one of Torrisi's core men from the very start, and if we consider the skills he'd already honed inside of the hills watching the bandits' movements since boyhood, it's easy to imagine he put that knowledge to work much earlier than most realize. In doing so, he would have increased the efficiency of Torrisi's operations, particularly hunting down bandits. And with that, the quiet but unmistakable fear that followed wherever Torrisi's men were known to walk. That is of course only one side of their overall operation, and to be fair, it's probably an aspect that they weren't really needing in terms of boosting their overall reputation, because as Luca says himself, their specialty, what Tino, the Don, and Luca himself would come to be known for, would be breaking up union strikes, particularly of the Fasci Siciliani. Historically speaking, the Fasci Siciliani was the era's most prominent labor movement, challenging the island's elites and forming strikes against the poor working conditions and low wages many workers were faced with. The movement ran from 1899 to 1894, giving us an idea of how long the then Torrisi clan would have been squashing these type of union strikes, as again, it's only referred to as work that they did in the 90s. It's yet another cornerstone and foundation of his work with the Torrisi clan, and an idea of how he looks at labor unions and strikes as a whole. During the same exact mission where he's out on collection day with Enzo in 1907, we do see him have a little bit of a sympathetic side, even addressing the leader of the strike by his name, talking to him like a normal human being. Whether if it's genuine or not, he also does appear to be sympathetic, to understand, and try to meet some common ground. Because no matter what his stance is, the bottom line is, a strike is bad for business. And bad business, as far as his boss is concerned, has to be met with force if they continue to disobey. At that time, it contrasts perfectly with Cesare's more willingness to meet problems head-on with violence and take a more delicate approach. But I'd also say that it may show that despite Luca taking part in that work and being known for that specifically, he may not have had such an aggressive stance even back then towards the workers, brushing off Enzo's defense of them having a point by saying, "It's just the way of the world." From the late 1880s into the 1890s, the Torrisi clan continued working on behalf of the elder Fontanella, strengthening their ties with his tenants and even building relationships beyond his lands. One such connection was with the Galante family, a well-known outfit based out of the port city of Porto al Marlo. Luca was at the forefront of much of this work, forming a familiar presence among the tenants and earning a degree of respect from some of them in his own right, as well as strengthen his own personal connections within the Galante family that'll only deepen and solidify over time. Everything appeared to be running quite smoothly until the elder Fontanella unexpectedly died, and his son, Raphael, stepped in to take over. Unlike his father, Rafael showed little interest in personally managing the properties he inherited. Instead, he left the day-to-day control of the land in the hands of the Torrisi family, who by then may have already been operating as a recognized crime family, or were at least close to their peak, with enough muscle and reputation to make their presence unquestionable. This arrangement extended to the factory in Colozolfo, which came under the management of Vincenzo Lorenzetti, a childhood friend of Don Torrisi and a man who, alongside Luca, had earned a reputation for breaking up union strikes. But Rafael Fontanella made a decision that would change the balance of the region forever. Instead of allowing the Torrisi family to extend their power and control into the territory of Colozolfo, specifically the sulfur mine, or even look after it himself, which presumably is something his father did, he instead sold his half of the share of the Colozolfo sulfur mine to new partners from Agrigento, who ended up bringing their own men into this region, who turned out to be none other than Ruggero Spadaro, or Don Spadaro, and Bastoni. Whether that Bastoni was Massimo, the father of Il Merlo or Leombra, or one of these two brothers remains uncertain. Whatever the case, selling those shares proved to be a dramatic turning point. Over time, Spadaro and his men expanded steadily outward from Colozolfo, encroaching further and further into Torrisi territory. Tensions would begin to simmer, until they finally reached a flashpoint during the Palio in San Celesti. Unfortunately, ultimately it was just a minor incident. Spadaro's men would argue with Torrisi's crew over nothing more than a bench overlooking the track. It might have and probably should have ended right there, but it didn't. Before the day was done, 3 of Torrisi's men were found dead, with their throats cut and their bodies dumped in a nearby river. It was Luca who found them, and it was Luca who was sent to deliver the news to their mothers. And from that moment forward, the Spadaro family was officially at war with the Torrisis and their allies, the Galantes. As a permanent member of the Torrisi family, it's safe to say Luca played an active role in both the planning and execution of hits against Spadaro's operations and his men. The war that followed was nothing short of brutal. Don Torrisi would later describe it as a bloodbath unlike anything the region had ever seen before. Dozens of men dead on both sides, each loss feeding the cycle of violence. What's most interesting, though, isn't just the Don's account of the war, but how different it sounds compared to Luca's version. Even in the way they speak of the Spadaros, the contrast is clear. For Don Torrisi, the war was personal. There's anger in his voice when he recalls it, and maybe rightfully so, given the disrespect he'd suffered and the lives of his men that were lost. Luca, on the other hand, speaks of it as an overall tragedy. There's a quiet restraint in his tone, a sense of a man who regrets the whole affair. When he mentions Spadaro and Bastoni, he calls them men of honor, just not like us.
Except his new partners brought in their own men from their operation in Agrigento.
Spadaro and Bastoni. Men of honor both, but not like us.
That is an understatement. Dogs with no code, no discipline, no tradition.
We showed them respect.
It's a telling choice of words. If not respect, it shows at least a refusal to speak down to enemies sworn to the same kind of life. A recognition that for all of the bloodshed, they were bound by similar codes, even if they stood on opposite sides of it. And even if in a war that Torrisi might have felt they followed honorably, dishonorable or not, the Spadaros lost men too. It was only after the needless and overly violent death of Michele Galante, along with his wife and 2 children, all perishing in a house fire set by Leombra late in the night, that the first real chance to negotiate peace emerged. Michele's death was more than a blow to the Galantes. It was a tragedy that hung over the entire conflict. Perhaps Luca believed that if Spadaro was honorable enough to acknowledge the pointless and dramatic loss of such a respected man as Michele, then he wasn't as dishonorable or hateful as Torrisi had made him out to be. That moment became the turning point. Spadaro agreed to allow the offender to face repayment at Torrisi's own hand, which in a grim act of justice, Torrisi used Michele's own knife to cut out the man's eyes, marking the end of a war that had bled the region dry. What followed was the beginning of a new chapter for the Galante family as they stepped into the role of mediators, holding together an uneasy truce between the Spadaros and the Torrisis. The peace was fragile, built on equal parts necessity and mistrust, but it held. And it might have been during this new time of peace that Luca found himself entering fatherhood, as his first son, Samuele, or Sam, would be born in 1897. In the years that followed, there were no major incidents between the families. Both sides seemed to have reached a firm understanding that everything within Colozolfo remained under Spadaro control, while the lands Torrisi had watched over since before the elder baron's death stayed firmly within his hands, which managed to include the factory as mentioned before, even though that was located inside the Colozolfo territory. The only real concern for the Torrisi family during this time period was the rise of the Messina gang. They had taken advantage of the war between the Spadaros and the Torrisis to quietly expand their influence across the region, but still, the Torrisis settled into the ebb and flow of their new routine. They leaned more into their legitimate front of the Torrisi wine business, while sponsoring local events and businesses at the same time. They would also come to double down on offering protection to those under their influence, especially against the growing threat of bandits following the leadership of Messina. For Luca, this may have been the period when he settled more fully into fatherhood and his life with his wife, Valentina. There's little record of when they met or married, but it's clear he loved her and was devoted to her. Even so, the relationship feels like a quieter part of this story, overshadowed by the aftermath of the war and the changes it brought to everyone involved. That was still very much heavily felt come 1904 when Enzo enters the picture. As a new father and a veteran of such a dangerous time, it's no surprise Luca was reluctant to risk war with the Spadaros over a boy for the first time he met Enzo, or to even question Torrisi's reasoning for wanting to. The matter became even more complicated when he learned Enzo had cut El Merlo's face. Normally, that would have been a death sentence, but Enzo was under the Don's protection now, and any move against him would have violated the peace agreement. Ironically, that very incident worked in Enzo's favor. Luca would later say he saw fire in the boy, something worth protecting and ultimately guiding. But his idea of guidance wasn't about forging a gunman or a soldier. He knew Enzo wanted to belong, to be part of the people who had saved him, and he wanted to make sure that he was able to carry himself with a level head and a genuine understanding of not just what they were doing, but why. That mindset comes through in Luca's choice of words and how he handles the various people around him. I've mentioned it before, but the third mission, Pizu, says almost everything you need to know about his deep history with the tenants and the many connections he's built over the last decade or so. He's quick to correct Cesare's rough description of collecting money as quote-unquote teaching people a lesson. Instead, he offers the softer, more measured phrase of reminding them of their obligations. And even then, there's not a hint of violence.
Don Torrisi looks out for people around here. Make sure they are protected from misfortune. That security comes with a price, of course, so we're going to collect what we are owed.
So what do you need me for?
Well, sometimes a client is feeling less than cooperative and we need to
Teach them a lesson.
remind them of their obligations. An extra pair of hands helps jog their memory. But don't worry. You keep your eyes open and listen.
It's more so akin to, hey, we might need a little extra muscle or another extra body here, and just your presence alone can push people over the edge. As he would also later say, violence is a last resort. The trick is to skim the cream without breaking the bottle. He's looking for a mutually beneficial outcome, even if that means playing a little ball with the tenants and doing whatever works for them. One tenant in particular, he even lets him act tough in front of his son. In order to not damage his reputation in front of his son's eyes, he hands Enzo an empty pistol and tells him, hey, this guy is stubborn, but he does always pay. And if his son is around, he's going to give us a little back and forth, which is fine. But when I give you the signal, you're going to show him this gun, and we're going to put the fear of God into his son, allowing the father to act tough and us still get paid in the end. It was completely unnecessary, but it spoke volumes how little Luca cared for violence for its own sake. For him, the priority was simple: maintain trust and keep the money flowing. The same approach is clear when dealing with Ficetta later. Rather than responding to the farmer's disrespect towards the three of them and the Don with force, Luca simply agrees to help. He offers to retrieve the stolen water pump and handle the bandits himself. Later, he explains his reasoning. Ficetta has a big mouth. If they take care of this, word will spread quickly. Everybody will hear, strengthening their reputation and their business. But if they let an offense against the Don go unanswered and allow the bandits to operate unchecked, that news will spread just as fast. Only this time, it would undermine their authority and weaken the faith people had in their protection. It all ties back to the give and take Luca had spoken of earlier. Every action either reinforces or erodes the standing they've built. And there is no winning in attacking people just for the sake of being paid, despite how simply Cesare tries to frame it to Enzo. In the few years Luca spends alongside Enzo, he isn't just a mentor to just him. He's also guiding Cesare. In many ways, he's preparing a new generation to understand that this life is as much about managing relationships and sustaining business as it is about strength. Quick, easy money gained through strong arming only erodes those connections over time, and Luca knows it. It's a position he likely would have continued to hold for many years if he stayed in the family. And of course, had his life not been cut short by a betrayal from both Spadaro and Baron Fontanella. The irony is that his death came after Cesare, of all people, voiced a rare moment of caution. He warned that Spadaro wasn't the same man they had dealt with before. He had attacked on a Day of the Saints, and worse, worked alongside the law. Who's to say this meeting is safe? In the end, sadly, that warning proved all too true. And Luca would pay for it with his life. The circumstances surrounding his death may well have been the catalyst for Don Torrisi abandoning any restraint, swallowing up everything Spadaro owned, and stamping out every last known associate of his. Honor and tradition no longer mattered, only vengeance. And with Luca gone, the one voice inside the family who spoke with reason was completely silenced, with Enzo no longer having his quiet shield from the Don or Tino. As a father of two boys and a mentor to Enzo, Luca had been the steadying presence between him and the worst of Torrisi's ambitions. Had he found out about Enzo and Isabella earlier, whether if Luca had been willing or able to protect Enzo once the Don's obsession with his daughter came to light is impossible to say. His death at his sit-down fits perfectly with the game's recurring theme of tragedy and the truth that no one really escapes this life. Still, there is a darker, almost poetic version that could have been. If Luca had been killed by the Don himself, sacrificing his life to give Enzo, Isabella, Valentina, and his own children a way out to the States. That idea obviously belongs more to speculation and to the ending many players wished for, with Enzo actually getting out and surviving. What remains tragic, no matter the version, is what became of Sam though. His father's final words were for Enzo, telling him to leave this life behind, to get out, to do anything he can, and leave. His mother, Valentina, had hated this life too, wishing Luca would give up the dangerous work altogether and stay back. We don't know what happened to her or to Luca's unnamed infant son, but Sam would reappear in the 1920s, working for the Salieri Crime Family, sinking deeper into the same world that had taken his father. He'd fight his own war as well, in the 30s against the Morello crime family, and in a cruel twist of fate, he too would die in it. Gunned down not by an enemy though, but by a friend he had betrayed in his climb for power and favor with Don Salieri. Thank you for sticking around to the very end. It really does mean a lot. I'm curious what you think about Luca Trapani, his position within the Torrisi crime family, and how things might have been differently had he survived. I do have another video coming out specifically on his death, but I do want to wait on major spoilers for the game right now. So subscribe for some future Mafia content, for analysis, breakdowns, and overall backstories. And a major shout out to my patrons, Daniel Homan, Konkin, and Ryan Smith. It's thanks to you that I'm able to spend so much time and go as detailed in these videos as possible. If you want to support the channel directly as well and get some behind the scenes or exclusive content on myself, the channel overall, and just how these videos are put together, then consider checking out the Patreon. Link is down in the pinned comment.